You got it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. And today, have we got a treat for you? We've got Lisa Ann. Lisa Ann is a fellow adoptee and also a fellow podcaster. So her podcast is the Wandering Tree podcast. And so great to have you on the show. Really looking forward to this.
Why, thank you. Thank you for having me on board. I appreciate the opportunity to, spread our truth and talk about our lived experience. So thank you so much. It's a
You're
pleasure.
welcome. Superb. So the topic that you came up with was the hidden and not so hidden burdens of being adoptee. Why did you come up with that?
Well, I've spent a lot of time like you have talking to other adoptees. And I want to share out just a little bit of what that means for us and how we, kind of continually progress in the community. We're listening, right? Podcasters are listening. The adoptee community is growing, it's becoming more vocal. As a result, we're sharing more throughout our experiences, about our experiences. We're engaging more as well. We're engaging in how our experience may be different from someone else, and we're learning. And that's the key. We're learning not only about ourselves, but about each other. And we're working to educate into the masses a little bit more about adoption so that we can see different narratives, maybe different outcomes, and maybe different life experiences. And so how did we get to the context of a burden through that process of listening with those that have shared and learning.
Okay. And what do you see as the burdens that we adoptees carry?
Well, let me take a minute here and kind of define a burden. I think it's important to kind of set a, kind of like a ground layer of the conversation. And, if we go back to a dictionary, something that we maybe haven't picked up in a while as as adults, I don't know, when's the last time you really looked at a dictionary? A couple of years or so?
I don't know. Never. I just put it into Google. I just put in the word into Google and Google has a dictionary for me. So.
Yeah, great point, right? The modernization of a dictionary. So while doing that, here is what the definition or how burden is defined. A load, typically a heavy one, that causes hardship, anxiety, and grief. Now, if there's any definition that universally spans some of the feelings and the experiences of the adoptee, I that's it, right? The hardships, the anxiety, and the grief. Talk about the top three.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Do you think metaphors sometimes make things worse?
I think they do sometimes. At the same time, it also helps us validate. It also helps us to cognitively think. It helps us to digest. And then when we apply critical thinking, it helps us kind of move through the continuum of thought. And so, it's an interesting place to be for sure.
Yeah. I love metaphors. Uh, uh, and this somehow some of them have a sense of foreboding for me. And the one being the primal wound. So I didn't really believe that I was wounded until I read the primal wound, and that took me down. And then when I saw that that the human spirit is unwoundable, that feeling wounded hadn't meant that I was wounded. That's when I kind of bounced back with what I now have heard people call post-traumatic growth. So the world's obsessed with post-traumatic stress disorder, but very few people talk about post-traumatic growth. So, the unburdening is like when we unburden, our shoulders rise, don't they? That, when we've got a load off our mind,
Absolutely. And we shed, right? Like, so if we want to use a metaphor, think of ourselves as, reptilian almost. We have to shed off some of these things. But before we shed them off, maybe we should talk about what they look like and what are some of the characteristics that we have picked up through these conversations that we're having. And so for your listeners, I'd like to share a little bit about my story, just a couple minutes. One, I am a US domestic closed adoption, early 70s. I waited until my 40s to really buckle down and begin my search for my biological beginnings. It became extremely important for me to do that. I did so utilizing commercial DNA. That comes with a plethora of things that even though you think you're prepared for, you really are not. And it becomes part of your growth cycle, to your point, right? We grow out of and into the next phase. And so, as part of that effort, I did find my paternal and my maternal families. And I've been in reunion with them, various stages, depending on the person, ever since. And so that has brought on, to your point, a lot of different reflection, how I have felt about some of those things. And there were periods throughout this journey that I have been, similarly to what you've said, brought down. And I've had to figure out how to come back up a little bit because I am a thriving adoptee in the context of that sentence, right? And thriving to me means I'm contributing in a positive way to society. I'm able to take care of myself. I'm socially, I can function in society. I have loving members of friends and family. All the things that I know about adoption and have framed my identity, they're shifting, and that's okay, right? That's coming up out of something a little bit different.
Yeah.
So I always think of my journey as one of love and joy and hope, a little bit of insecurity, a little bit of fear. Then we go into rejection and heartbreak and shame. And then when we get down to it, and through some of my own experiences and my conversations of my journey and those connections, I started taking on some of the burden, right? The burden, which is why we're here, of everybody else's actions. And they weren't mine to own. And it took me a bit to figure out I don't need to own that. I don't need to own that. It's not mine to own. I'm not trying to please anyone. It's not important to please everyone. But more importantly, don't let that bring me down.
Yeah. That's beautiful the way you said that. I just want to, and I love the juxtaposition. Love, joy, hope, a bit of fear, and a bit of insecurity. Sounds like a really great cocktail, doesn't it? The one of the things I really want to make it clear to listeners, because I don't think I do enough, is that thriving does not mean never feeling insecure. It doesn't mean never fearing anything. This kind of, what do people call it? The eternal sunlight of the spotless mind. I'm not quite sure how it, that idea that we are sold, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are sold, whether people are selling us a holiday, a drug, a self-development course, an adoptee course, a whatever it is. People sell us this mirage of 100% wall-to-wall, 24-hour, 24/7, 365, 366 in a leap day, leap year, happiness, and a complete absence of insecurity. That's not what thriving adoptees means to me.
Yeah. I think it's important to level set that because it does have a lot of different connotation depending on where you are in your journey too, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk, if you wouldn't mind and indulge me a little bit. I do have a little bit of a background and education in the human development. I hold a degree in early childhood development. I hardly ever use it anymore. I'm more of a business person. But when we were really talking about, some of the things that were important to address, in our adoptee community and how to shape up an episode, I went back to my roots of early childhood development education, and it was profound for me. It was part of that learning and shaping as a result of someone sharing. And not only my own examples of these areas, but just listening to other adoptees talk about some of the things that they still have to do for the sake of someone else. So, if we break down this topic into really four segmented areas and we address it from infancy, childhood, adolescence, and adult, I think we can level up the conversation a little bit and come out with four fairly common burdens. Now, again, my point of reference is I've talked to a lot of adoptees as a podcaster, as you have. I have ingested a whole lot of what they have said. I have felt their pain. I felt their joy. I empathize with them. I can relate in a lot of instances. I've been through some of those things too. And then there are things that are brought to my attention that I've yet to experience, but I'm probably better prepared for it.
Yeah. So what do you see as those four burdens? Which way do you want to do it? Do you want to do it by stage or by burden, or
Yeah,
both?
let's do it by stage, because I think that if we give the context to our listeners and we each get an opportunity to again reflect on our own experience, right? Let's also be clear. By no means am I a therapist, nor are you, and nor are we trying to be. We're just sharing experience and thought process and critical thinking. And so with that said, let's start with infancy, right? That is the period from when you are born to about 3 years old. As podcasters, I hear on the very regular all of the things associated with on my first day, on my got you day, I don't remember, or I have these items. So we think about what happens in infancy, right? We are at that point in time, we're just trying to survive. That's important. We're trying to understand the external noises out of utero. We're trying to uh, come into our own as an infant. We don't have coping skills. In fact, many studies, and we can cite some if we need to, but I'm confident most of the listeners are aligned with this, show that a lot of the things that we need as babies come from our parents in terms of coping, crying, warmth, right? Tenderness, sound, those items. And depending on, or fully dependent upon, your date of birth, your relinquishment, and where you went, which for me is what I call life gap. I have a life gap. I have no idea what happened to me as a human after the date of relinquishment until my adoption finalization day. I presume or speculate on a very regular basis I was in foster care. But in that time period, the burden was put on me as a baby to figure out all those coping skills absent my mother, absent my birth mother, the person that I had connected with while in utero. And so that's the first burden. I believe adoptees end up needing to, in a very weird way, determine different coping skills. And for myself, if I get emotional, for example, I feel that is how I was conditioned as a baby to cope. And I have to temper that down or tap that down in a different way. And I become silent, right? I come into myself and I become silent. But we're storing all those things. We're storing all of that in that infancy stage in our body. And we carry that burden for a long time because it is what we know until we unburden ourselves, which we will get to. And we carry it through physical elements as well. Many adoptees I've talked to have stressed stomach issues, by example. high anxiety, stress. Those are physiological and physical items. So that's infancy.
Yeah. Okay. So next one's childhood. Yeah.
Childhood. So here we're taking on more things, right? In our growth patterns, we're a little bit more physical. Our social skills are starting to get developed. We're starting to present ourselves as independent. We want to start shifting some of our thought process, right? Autonomy comes in. We're walking, we're talking, we're doing all of these things. We start genetic mirroring. We start looking at people around us. We see blue eyes, we're brown eyes. We see dark hair, we're blonde hair. We see, tall people, we're short. All those things that we don't know where we've come from. We notice things relative to, our noses, our mouths, our, all of those pieces that are associated with genetic mirroring. We also notice behaviors. And so now we're starting to try to fit into this area of squishy where we see who we're with. We know that there are parents by the conversation. We're still working through those coping skills. We're starting to carry that baggage. And now we're going to add on, we're creating a false identity because I'm trying to now look and be like someone else. So now I have the burden of a false identity because I don't know who I am. I'm not seeing people that are like me. And therefore, it carries into my self worth and my vision of myself and how I'm seeing me in the context of all of my childhood friends. We're on the playground, we're doing things. And then for myself in my story, I knew at an early age that I was adopted. I was told I was adopted as I was entering into kindergarten. And so I'm trying to process that during that childhood stage. And now I know I'm different, I'm special, I'm chosen. And yet it doesn't reflect in how everything else around me is transpiring.
Yeah. So kindergarten's what age, Lisa?
For myself in America, 5 years.
5 years old. Okay.
5 years old. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was told a lot earlier. So maybe there's a jarring factor there that is different. That our experience is different in terms of that. You know, that not knowing or that being told.
Yeah, and I do believe that the discovery of your adoption in your growth, human development, has a different impact each time. I cannot relate with late discovery. Ooh, I mean, if I don't even know where I'd be if I was a late discovery, because your entire world becomes very different. The optics are different. I do know what it's like to be told as you're going into grade school. And now I mean, just you're processing so much as you're heading into your early education, career. I call it a career. And all this time you were this child of this family, and now you're different. And it's just a really unique time to enter into the conversation and to tell the person they're different. And by no means do I think I corner the market on knowing when is the right time, because I really don't.
So after childhood, we've got adolescence. Yeah.
We have adolescence. Here are the things we're trying to do as an adolescent, which is really our preteen years. So somewhere in a slice of our teen years, right? 13 to 19 years old. Whew, I have those in my house. I have a 13-year-old. I have a excuse me, not a 19-year-old. I have a 13-year-old and an almost 17-year-old. And I see what they go through. And I do remember those years. So our morality, we're starting to become a little bit more moral in our thinking. We're a little less self-centered. We're starting to apply abstract thought and critical thinking. It amps up a little bit. And we're still trying to piece together who we are, right? In the best of circumstances, those preteens and teens are trying to be someone, right? Am I the cool kid? Am I the, whatever label you want? Am I the nerd? Am I the smart one? Am I, they're working through that, and you add on, and I'm adopted and I'm chosen, and this isn't my family, but this is my family. And, all of that, you put all that together. And so they're all trying to survive the change of life, right? Their puberty and the things that are going on in their bodies and in their minds. And then what do we do? Because we're becoming more cognitively aware of the situation in this space, adults are starting to talk to us differently as well. They're starting to treat us as adolescents with a little bit more information and more knowledge. They become more comfortable talking to us about certain things in this stage of life. And so now we're getting questions potentially about how we feel about our adoption as we're going through all those other things. And so we're placing this burden of uh, concept of the society's view of adoption. So now I'm working through adolescence. I don't know how to cope. I have false identity. And now you're asking me all kinds of questions about adoption because you're starting to feel more comfortable about it. And you layer on top of that I should be thankful. Oh, that's so cool. Your parents adopted you. And now I have to look at my adopters as if they have this hero Oedipus, like they've done something miraculous by adopting me. So I'm bearing that burden now too. So now we're at 3 burdens.
Okay. Can we skip adulthood and just get onto the unburdening? No, we can't, can we? We've got to go through the adult.
I think we need to get to it, right? Because I
Yeah,
think this is
okay.
my favorite one, and I love it from the context of my own experience. So we're into adulthood, and if you're one of the adoptees in this conversation who has done some searching, and now you're in that search mentality, this is where it gets really dicey for me, and I don't like it. I'm going to be honest. This is the burden that I feel is the most weighty. And it is what happens when you're searching or you have found someone. And it hit home for me when I was interviewing one of my own guests, and we had an off mic conversation. And in that off mic conversation, the person said to me, uh, in relationship to their search and discovery, I have siblings. And my dad, my biological father, has absolutely forbid me to reach out to them. And I was floored. I'm like, you're an adult, they're adults. His secret is not your burden. And they were just crushed. I don't know what to do. I feel just, I just want to have an opportunity to meet them. And I asked my guest, why are you carrying the burden of that secret? That is not your secret. You do not own their secret. You may be the secret, but you don't own it. I'm not asking or advocating go upset everybody's apple cart, but don't sit in the space of hurt and further rejection because you don't want to hurt that paternal person who does not want you revealed. They're not thinking of your best interest and your growth. They're continuing to protect themselves. So why do we have to, as adoptees, carry the burden of the search and the secret? Because it's an emotional toll. It's an extremely emotional toll for us. On top of the other 3 we've already talked about, right? So we're working through, now we're into adulthood, and we're working through our coping mechanisms. We're acknowledging our anxiety. We're acknowledging some of our loss and our grief. We are acknowledging false identity. In America, we have a pretty significant movement going on relative to access to original birth certificates, where people are learning that they had different names and how that changed as a result of an adoption. And then we talked about the burden of society's narrative that I should be grateful that I was adopted and oh, what great parents I had. And we put them on this pedestal of a hero. And we just keep carrying that forward every every instance, all the time, every conversation. And it becomes part of our DNA and our go forward. So what can we do?
Well,
I
yeah, I mean the burdens seem to me like, if we to sum up, the burdens are feelings, aren't they?
I think they're feelings. I definitely agree with that, but they're also become how we approach our lives and our behaviors and who we are. And if we continue to pile on and take on all of those pieces of burden that I've just described, and we don't necessarily rid ourselves of them because we're probably not capable. As an infant, I'm not capable of going, oh, I don't need to have this coping mechanism where when I feel like I'm not getting my needs met, I shut down and stop talking to people. I don't know how to resolve that as an infant, right?
No,
I'm crying,
clearly.
I'm crying, I'm crying, and no one's picking me up. I guess I should just be quiet, right? So I don't, I just, for myself and in my experience only, I wasn't capable of working through shedding or releasing all of those until I was in adulthood. And it's a process. I don't think I'm done. I don't know if anyone is ever done, but I definitely understand the needs to get through some of that, right? So let's talk about what we can do to get rid of some of these burdens. Like, what's our message? Well, the first message is kind of self-reflection. And are you carrying stuff? Are you, adoptee, carrying stuff that you shouldn't? It's okay to leave it at the door, right? It's almost like the acceptance and the acknowledgement of it. It's okay to leave it sit there and not pick it up. That's number one, kind of knowing yourself. Give yourself some grace. We're so hard on ourselves. I don't know. Have you had that experience, Simon, where you're talking to adoptees and they're just so super critical of themselves and just own so much? So,
Yes, and I've heard I've heard the I've done most of my unburdening, uh, and continue to do most of my unburdening, right? In and amongst non-adoptees, and they self-criticism to me seems to be part of the human condition.
do you think that in your experience there's a little bit of are we wired differently as adoptees as a result of some of the things that I just pointed out also, or do we become hypervigilant as a result of some of those nuances? Because I would never advocate others in society don't struggle with some of those same things, right? But I do believe there are a couple of them that are nuanced to adoption, and that is the burden that society puts on relative to the narrative of gratitude and heroism,
Yeah.
and the burden of, I need to continue to keep your secret.
So I don't know what else is. I don't know what the depth of what else is going in anybody else's mind or heart or soul. I have no clue. I have no clue. I can only talk for myself. And for example, I have never, as you were explaining the burdens, I could see how it's trickier for transracial adoptees. But I don't, as a white guy adopted by white parents, I don't have that. But I can see how it could be. Like the burden would definitely be heavier the way that you explained it. In terms of and the gratitude thing, I don't know whether that's an American thing, but I've never been told that. I've never been told that I should be grateful. I've never, and so I've never. I know I see so much of this amongst like people being adoptees being angry about that, and I've never experienced the comment, and therefore I've never experienced my response to the comment.
That is fascinating to me because I know I've experienced that comment. I have witnessed via social media in the very recent past where that has been uh, expressed by non-adoptees. And I've never considered it as something that would be dividing based off of your location of adoption and the narrative of that. That would be interesting to dig into a little bit more at some point in time.
I think it's a cultural thing, right? So I think as it's an American versus a UK culture. So I think we are as stiff upper lip Brits. We talk less about our emotions, and we're perhaps a little less forthright. So somebody told me, an adoptive mum told me yesterday. She was asked by American lady. She was asked, how much did you buy your baby for? And that was like a gut punch to me. I felt that for her. And I, as I reflect on it now, well, there's a culture. It's not a cultural difference here in the UK. No money changes hands. So there's that level of burden. This. When I saw a price list for kids, I felt like being sick, right? But we don't have that in the UK. So it's my self-worth my self-worth is expressed in dollars. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen in the UK, and therefore that extra burden. So I've got a price on my head. That's what I.
Right.
Am I a slave? What do we say? Price on the head. Price on the head. Slave. A hitman. Your target for a hitman. He's got a price on his head, and it's like, so my worth is $20,000. But if I was white, and I don't know these figures, right? If I was
Right.
white, I'd be worth X dollars more. I mean, it's and the whole kind of what people term the adoption industry. We have an adoption public sector here in the UK. So the public sector, the adoptions are funded by government, and the government pays the agencies, and the agencies do the things, right? So you've got that whole kind of anti-capitalism, anti-price on the head. So cultural things way different. And I think going back to the point about me never being told I should be grateful, I think maybe that's just a British thing. Maybe it's just down to me. Who knows? But being bothered about what other people think, it is like nuts to me. Absolutely nuts. It's so disempowering. Not that I don't bother. Not that I don't do it.
Yeah, it's a space that you have not had to sit in or wasn't impressed upon you to sit in. And maybe it it's fascinating. It's fascinating to me in our conversation that it might come down to a very difference in approach of the whole topic of how to, when to, where to adopt as it relates to the structure, the outcomes, and the conversations. This is why we podcast too. I learn, right? I think we started this conversation a little bit around listening, sharing, learning, educating. And it is fascinating to have those different perspectives because it is the really the core of trying to educate and change where change is necessary. And maybe the change in the UK is different or whatever is needed, around the topic could have a different sensitivity than the change that is needed here in America. And let's go back to the burden of false identity. I don't know enough. This is a great conversation to educate on. Based off of the process of adoption in the UK, was there ever a time, do you guys not know who you are? Like, and I'm utilizing the context of I did not know my birth given name until I figured out who I belonged to. And I did have a birth given name, and it is not this name. And does it matter? I don't know. I also don't know, by example, I spoke to, a few minutes ago, Life Gap. I don't know if people called me the birth given name or if they made up their own name until I was adopted, which was about a 6-month period.
So you're talking to Simon Jonathan Ben, right? My birth given name was David Anthony Flower. I didn't find that out until 6 years ago. And
wow.
When I found that out, I thought, oh, that's interesting. I've had 2 names. And a bit later on, I got a question, or not a question, a realization popped into my head. If I've had 2 names, I can't be either.
I'll expand on that a little bit.
Well, it seems to me the identity thing is the key. So, do you mind if I share my take on what identity is?
I would love you to do that.
Okay. So, number one, we're not our names. Well, no, let me back up a bit. Number one, the truth never changes. The truth never changes. And the way that was expressed to me, when that really landed for me, was somebody held up a pen on a video call and dropped it, and he said, within the Earth's gravitational field, this pen will always drop down. That's truth. Gravity is truth within the rainbow. So truth, essence, nature never changes. It's fixed. The truth never changes. So the truth of who I am, as somebody that's had 2 names, I can't be either of those names because the truth never changes, right? So as I see identity as a set of concentric circles. So lots of circles getting even smaller, right? So if I put on the outside of the biggest circle, I have the word name, as in Simon Jonathan Ben. Then we can go a bit in maybe inside, and I might be getting this in the wrong order. I'm not really sure which order it goes in, but we can say we are our body, but
Right.
but we say that's my finger. Yeah, that's my hand. Well, so my hand, that sounds like a possession. That sounds like an object, not a subject. So we're not our body. Another way of thinking about our body is I was unfortunate. Well, unfortunately, my father-in-law died like 10 years ago. Maybe not 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And I saw him. I saw him in the old people's home where he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
So his body was there, but the essence, the animating force that animates his body, the life spirit, the chi, as they call it in the East, that wasn't there. So he's not his body. We aren't our bodies. So we're not our names. We're not our bodies. a lot of us identify with our feelings. So we say, I am happy or I am sad. You talked about, joy. You said, so I am joyful or I am afraid. It's about fear. So, but we identify with our emotions. So, but the emotions change all the time. So one minute I'm a happy, thriving adoptee. Next minute I'm an insecure bag of nerves. Right. So it changes, and truth never changes. So we're not our names because they change, and most people aren't born with names, right? So they can't be who they're baby A, aren't they? And
Mm-hmm.
before they're John Smith, or I don't know, before they're Joe Biden, they are, or before they're Rishi Sunak, they are baby A. So we're not our names, we're not our bodies, because we're the force that drives those bodies. We're not our feelings, because they change all the time, and we're not on the same basis. We're not our thoughts, because our thoughts change all the time. So one minute I'm thinking this is a great conversation, I'm loving this with Lisa, and she is absolutely pure genius. The next minute I'm looking at the clock thinking, I've got another call in 8 minutes, and how can we wrap this up? Yeah. So
Yeah.
our thoughts change, right? So we can't be any of those things. And the best way that I use this quote a lot, and I never know how to pronounce the guy's name. He says, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience, with spiritual beings having a human experience. Spiritual beings having a human experience. And that's who we are, a spiritual being. Or you can separate that out, you can shorten that down to the fact we're spirit. So all the human experience stuff, the name, the body, the feelings, the thoughts, the tough stuff we've gone through, that we've all gone through, especially adoptees separating from our birth mother. That's all part of the human experience, but we are not our human experience. We're the spiritual being that's experiencing we're the spiritual beings experiencing all that, and the spiritual being is untouched by all of that stuff. So that's my take on identity.
And you know what I love about it? And I think it's a good place for us to come to how to continue to unburden. What another great way to approach the topic and really get yourself grounded in identity and who you are, and more comfort around that, so that you are not, as an adoptee or just a human in general, sitting in this space where you can't move. You are paralyzed by all the things we talked about throughout this episode. You're paralyzed by your thought process, your cognitive abilities. You're paralyzed by your emotions that are, intersecting. Those two intersect, and then you respond accordingly. And it's fascinating, and it's always a good thing to have these types of conversations, because we're going to leave this conversation and someone's going to listen to it, and they're going to pick up one or two tidbits. And that may be the one or two tidbits they needed to move to the next level of their healing process and their journey, so that when they are in reflection, they can approach the topic similarly to how you and I are approaching it, which says, yeah, it's a journey. It has all of those elements that we mentioned, right? Joy and love and heartbreak and insecurity and self and fear, and then they can be, whatever version of themselves they want to be, because it's not my responsibility nor your responsibility, nor would we ever want it to be, to tell someone how they should process, how they should feel, how they should internalize, what they should do. We just want to share the thought process of some of our experiences, and give some tidbits, right? So that was great. And it lends into another way to unburden if you're fortunate enough to have it in your tool belt the ability to go to a therapist and an adoption competent therapist, one that can kind of understand what you're talking about, yeah, do it. I right now, uh, I don't have that physically available based off of where I live. I can do it virtually, but I just haven't felt comfortable enough doing that. So how am I laying down my burdens? I'm laying down my burdens by talking to other adoptees, by podcasting, by being connected, which is my third way, being connected into the community so I can glean from those conversations where we're sharing and I'm listening and I'm engaging and I'm educating myself.
Yeah.
So I would say the three and adding your fourth one in there, it's give yourself grace. I'm going to add the one that I'm going to give it a name, a little bit of a name. I think I like think of yourself as the spiritual being in a human experience, and maybe kind of turn your thought process to that. If you're fortunate enough to get some therapy, go for
Yeah.
it, right? Never have shame in therapy. And, in all honesty, connect to the community and find people that can help you work through some of these elements of the journey.
I I've had a lot more coaching than therapy. I had some sessions with a therapist a few years ago, and I was paralyzed in my chair. So she asked me something about my birth mum, and I went rigid. I was paralyzed with fear when the idea of my birth mother popped into my head.
Wow.
And the idea of her standing outside of the adoption, the therapy room, and rejecting me again. That was 6, 7, 8 years ago, and it was I've had two very very intense bursts of um, horrible feelings around my birth mother, two 10-second bursts in 55 years. So they really stand out for me. Anyway, so I paralyzed, and then I was paralyzed for I don't know how long, not long. And then I went straight into it, right? I'm not going to let this fear, this fear ruin my life. And restarted my search after that.
Mhm.
So I would say the therapist wasn't particularly good. She was. Wouldn't describe her as adoption competent, but that thought that came to me, that paralysis, followed by some kind of rejection of the paralysis. Who knows? That set me back on the way. It set me back on the way, and I wouldn't be able to tell you that I was David Anthony Flower. I wouldn't be able to tell you all the other healing stuff that's happened since then. And my birth mother unfortunately died, and she died long before I picked up the search. But I found that out. So this search for identity that I summed up in, I don't know, a minute. I've been studying that for 13 years. And
Right.
I continue to study it, and I continue to feel insecure sometimes, and I continue to thrive despite the insecurity in my head, anyway.
Yeah. And I think those are common things as an adoptee. And those things happen even if you're not an adoptee,
Indeed.
right? Right. We may feel more magnified in them as the adoptee, or feel that it is contributing, but those are all things that humans feel.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what is our best way of kind of closing out the topic. And I was I was approaching my thought process from not only sharing thoughts and perspective with adoptees and labeling some of those, as you said, emotions, and it's a great call out of that as burden, but also helping non-adoptees who are in conversation with us when we are in those places. And acknowledging there are things we do talk about that we feel, we own, we take on that they don't understand because there's not a like life experience. And it's sometimes hard as an adoptee to like get to that point where you accept, like I've accepted, in my non-adopted family, they sometimes don't just get it, my husband, he is one of them that once in a while he just doesn't get it. He's like, it was something that happened to you. It is not who you are. And I have to reel that back in and say, but so you understand, it is part of who I am. It's not just a singular event. It is, as we've said, the journey. So if I were to wrap up, kind of in the context of what would I want a non-adoptee listener to take away, because I always think of the takeaways. The non-adoptee listener takeaway for me is that adoption does have a lot of layers and it can be beautiful, right? It really can. There are some really beautiful stories out there. It can be good, which means, yeah, moderate, nothing different than anyone else's life. And there can be quite a bit of bad associated with it. And there are horrific stories out there. We have to be accepting, and at least acknowledgement of it can be all of those as well, good, bad, right? Beauty, good, bad, and horrific. But if you do decide to engage in a conversation with an adoptee, approach it like you would any other educational experience or any other, kind of critical thinking conversation that says, hey, maybe I don't know, maybe I don't know. And what can I learn from this event? But what also can I do to be supportive? It doesn't mean you allow me to wallow in something. It just means you have a little bit more empathy to, some of those context of. And I just, I go back to how we started the example of one of my guests who was carrying the burden of a secret, right? Just acknowledge maybe that's not mine to carry. Help me acknowledge that, help me move past that. Um, those types of activities, right? And educate yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Lisa, and thank you, listeners, for listening as always.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here on the show with you and the Thriving Adoptees. And, I would encourage as well, if you don't mind, I'm going to give a little plug to Wandering Tree Podcast.
You beat me to it.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Just so you know, I appreciate when I get these types of opportunities to work with other podcasters and other adoptees. I feel it is a privilege, right? It is absolutely a privilege to be able to talk to and with people and share out. So thank you so much.
Yeah. So as always, listeners, we have in the show notes links to the website, the socials for every guest that we have, and obviously in Lisa Ann's case, we're gonna have a link to the Wandering Tree podcast. I've checked it out, and I listened to the first few episodes which you did with your husband, didn't you? And they were really different and refreshingly different. I am always trying to think of new formats. But I love that format that you did with your husband in there. I thought that was beautiful and really creative and all the more impactful for being in a what, not just what you said, what you shared, but also the fact that you did it in such a different format. It was really good.
Oh, we appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, he's been on hiatus for a while, but there's a lot of good content out there, a lot of good adoptees, very conversational like yours. So thank you so much. We appreciate it.
You're a star. Thank you very much, listeners, and we'll speak to you very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.